Hello, this is the Private Investigator Experience Podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Little. On this channel, I share the cases of life of a PI, and I also look at world events through my investigative lens, provide some facts for everyone to make their own decisions about. Over the years, I've looked at terrorist attacks, stalker issues around celebrities and other high net worth people, political decisions that will affect our way of life, and changes in laws that can affect our free speech. My first effort in this endeavor was back in the 70s when I got involved in Israel and Lebanon and started discovering terrorism. And my first book, Hostile Intent, was my case study on finding the source of terrorism. Written in an investigative style, it's got some things in it that people think are fiction that didn't really happen, but they did. And so this is Holy Week. And most people in the United States know what that is. And even out around the world, Christians are the majority in the U.S. We're a Christian nation formed on biblical principles, and that's factual. If anyone wants to go back and look at the founding documents and our founding fathers and what they wrote and what they said. But I'm amazed at the number of people who don't know anything about God or who profess to be atheists or agnostics. And so this Holy Week in the Christian religion is probably the two things that are top of the list is the birth of Jesus and then Easter, which was the death of Jesus on the cross. You see that Christians claim that Jesus is the Son of God. He came to earth as a man to redeem sinful mankind. Is that real? Or is it just a myth? I decided to take a deep dive investigation to take a look at this. I want to share some facts that you can consider for yourself if these claims are true. I'm going to be looking at the lives of two individuals. They were atheists, both of them, and they started out to prove the Bible. Well, let's see what they found out. The first was a man by the name of Josh McDowell, who wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. This book was written many years ago, and he was an attorney, a very skilled attorney, who decided that he was going to disprove Christianity. So he took his legal approach as if preparing a case for court. He had to have all the facts enough to be beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm going to tell you about his story a little bit. Josh is now a respected Christian apologetics writer, offering a thorough examination of evidence for the faith. Let me ask you this. What if historical evidence supporting Christianity is true? What would you do? Would you explore it if you don't know anything about Christianity? And then I'm going to look at a second individual who was a skeptical journalist named Lee Strobel. Imagine, hardened atheist, armed with a notepad and a mission to disprove Christianity. He could find himself persuaded by the fact. That is Lee Strobel's story. His journey was detailed in a book, The Case for Christ. Turned a doubter into a believer. And so let's unpack both of these lives. And they're very similar. They were both on about a 2-year journey, and they found out some of the same facts as they went along. So I'm going to blend them together and just lay out a few things here in a few minutes. And first off, Strobel wasn't just any journalist. He was an award-winning legal editor for the Tribune newspaper. He was trained to chase the facts and expose truth. When his wife became a Christian, it sparked a personal crisis for him. He saw it as a challenge to his atheistic worldview. He launched a 2-year investigation, interviewing top scholars, determined to debunk their faith. But the evidence he found flipped the script. Let's look at some evidence that he found out. The Bible's manuscript evidence is unparalleled. With over 24,000 total New Testament manuscripts, Latin and Coptic and others. They dwarf any other ancient work. The time gap between the original writings and the earliest copies are remarkably, it's a short time frame. The John Wright fragmented record, AD 125, is dated within about 35 years of the Gospel of John's composition. Then we have the archaeological discoveries, such as the Hittite civilization. It was once thought to be a myth, but it was confirmed in the 19th century, consistent with biblical accounts over skepticism. Then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are dated between 250 BC and AD 68. And they include nearly the entire Old Testament, with the Isaiah scroll showing 95% textual accuracy compared to medieval copies. Then we have more findings that Chaldean steel dated to the 19th century BC. And this is the earliest extra biblical reference to the house of David, King David, and his historical existence. Even if you're aware of the Bible, haven't been around Christianity, you've heard of King David, which was a very famous man and leader in Israel. Then we had another story from the Bible, the Pool of Siloam. This was mentioned in John 9:7. And this was excavated in 2004 in Jerusalem. It matched the New Testament description of its location and function. It's not a myth anymore. Well, and then some people say the Bible's been corrupted over time. Textual criticism, which is this, reveals 99.5% accuracy in the New Testament manuscript, with the variants mostly minor, like a spelling or a word order. Definitely no core doctrine is affected. Well, let's dive into two key areas that rock Strobel's skepticism: the reliability of the New Testament and the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. And that is what's being celebrated on this coming Sunday. These aren't just abstract ideas. They're the concrete pillars that support the Christian faith. I think by the end, you'll see why Strobel couldn't walk away from what he discovered and why it just might matter to you. Okay, so the reliability of the New Testament. And we trust the New Testament as a historical document. If it's shaky, the whole case crumbles. If it holds up, everything changes. Strobel asked this question, and the answers he got were game changers. The Gospels were written within decades of Jesus' life. Mark was around 70 AD, just 40 years after Jesus' death. Then we have James, half-brother of Jesus, who wrote James in AD 45. And that's just a blink in historical terms. Compare that to Alexander the Great's biography. It was written 400 years after his death, and no one doubted its core facts. They take it as truth 400 years later. Why then should we doubt the Gospels? Paul's letter, like in 1 Corinthians, from 55 AD, included a creed about Jesus' resurrection that scholars were able to trace within 2 to 5 years of the event. That's close. This closeness means eyewitnesses were still around. People who could say, that's not how it happened. It didn't happen at all. We know that didn't happen. There wasn't anybody that stood up because it happened to be true. In the manuscript evidence, we've got over 5,000 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Blows every other ancient text out of the water. This mountain of copies lets scholars compare them, piecing together the original with over 99% accuracy. That's mind-blowing, right? Most differences are tiny. Things like Jesus versus Jesus Christ or a misspelled word. Nothing that shakes the big picture. Contrast these with other ancient work. where gaps and guesses are common. The New Testament preservation is unmatched. Then we could look at more archaeological support. Dig sites keep backing up the New Testament. In 1961, Pilate inscriptions were found on rocks that proved Pilate was real and that he was living in that time frame. The pool of Bethesda in John 5. Skeptics called it a fake until archaeologists found it in Jerusalem, exactly where John said it was. Then the village where Jesus grew up, Nazareth, that existence was questioned too. But digs uncovered that first century village, very real, just as described. These finds, and many more we don't even have time to go into, show the gospel writers knew their stuff. They weren't making up places or people. Strobel went on and to talk to a renowned expert, Dr. Craig Bloomberg. He was a New Testament expert who'd studied this text for years and decades. Bloomberg said the Gospels check all the boxes for reliability. Early accounts, multiple sources, and details that match history. He highlighted the embarrassing bits, like Peter denying Jesus 3 times after he was arrested, or the disciples that argued over who's greatest. Why include these unless they're true? Bloomberg's work on gospel authorship and transmission gave Strobel hard data. But what about the contradictions? Skeptics asked, sure. Now, one gospel says one angel to two, another says two. Think of it like this. If you have two witnesses to a car accident, each see it from a different angle, but the crash still happened. These variations show independence, not collusion. Fabricated stories would line up perfectly. Bloomberg told Strobel, minor discrepancies are a hallmark of authentic testimony, not a flaw. What about the evidence for the resurrection? Objection. They say the resurrection is impossible. Let's look at that. If there is a transcendent God that exists, miracles are plausible and possible. We have the empty tomb, 500 plus witnesses. The resurrection is Christianity's make or break moment. If it's real, Jesus is who he said he was. Game over for skepticism. Strobel found 3 big clues that point to yes. Let's unpack them. The empty tomb. All 4 gospels say the tomb was empty. It was found by women, and in that time frame, women's word didn't count for much. That's a bold move if you're faking it. Jesus' enemies didn't deny it. They said the disciples stole the body. That's an admission that the tomb was empty. That was in Matthew 28:11 through 15. The tomb's location was public knowledge. Roman and Jewish leaders could have paraded the body if he was still there. They didn't, because the tomb was empty. No grave robbers don't unwrap bodies. And the disciples weren't exactly master thieves. Then we have the post-resurrection appearances. Over 500 people saw Jesus alive. There was Thomas, who needed to touch the wounds to believe. That was in John 20:24 to 29. And then we have James, Jesus' brother. He went from a skeptic to a church leader after seeing him. Family's the hardest to convince, right? Paul's story, the Apostle Paul. You might have heard of him when you're around the church or not. He was a Christian-hating Pharisee who met Jesus on the road to Damascus and became an apostle of Jesus. And this wasn't a casual change, because the Apostle Paul was running all over the countryside, arresting, putting in prison, and killing Christians. So this was a radical change for him. These weren't hallucinations. Jesus ate fish. He talked. Over 500 people don't hallucinate the same thing at the same time. Then we have the post-crucifixion. The disciples were a mess, hiding, scared, hopeless. Then suddenly, they're preaching to crowds and facing death. Peter went from denying Jesus to dying for him, crucified upside down. James was beheaded. Liars don't die for a con. They had no riches or fame to gain, just persecution. Their courage screams conviction. This shift happened fast, within weeks. They're proclaiming the resurrection in Jerusalem, where it could have been disproved if false. Well, the disciples stole the body, some say. They were too scared, and the tomb had Roman guards who'd die if they failed. Then what about the swoon theory? Jesus just fainted. Roman executioners were pros. Crucifixion kills, and the spear thrust into Jesus' side confirmed that. John 19:34. Even if Jesus survives, a beaten, half-dead guy doesn't roll away a 2-ton stone and inspire a movement. Every alternate theory falls apart under scrutiny. Strobel couldn't find one that held water. Let's look at the Old Testament, Micah 5:2. This specifies Bethlehem as the Messiah's birthplace, fulfilled precisely in Jesus' birth, Matthew 2:1. And despite Bethlehem's obscurity, it proved to be true. Another example is Isaiah 53. This was 700 years, or 700 BC, before Jesus' birth. It details a suffering servant for humanity's sins, and this easily matched Jesus' crucifixion 700 years later, John 19:34. Over 300 messianic prophecies align with Jesus, including Psalms 22:16-18. The pierced hands and feet, divided garments, which was done by the soldiers before Jesus was put on the cross. This was written centuries before crucifixion was even invented. The Dead Sea Scrolls, dated pre-Jesus time, they contained all these prophecies. In the great Isaiah scroll, with the whole book of Isaiah on it, ruled out later tampering. And then, what about a mathematician, Peter Stoner, calculated the odds of one person fulfilling just 8 specific prophecies, as in 1 to the power over 17, and this is akin, he said, to finding a single marked silver dollar in a 2-foot deep pile covering Texas. That's a pretty big chance. I think that's probably more than 1 in 300 million to win the lottery. Strobel's digging showed the New Testament stands up to scrutiny. Early, preserved, and archaeologically solid. The resurrection evidence, an empty tomb, eyewitnesses, transformed lives, turned these two skeptics, McDowell and Strobel, into believers. This isn't blind faith. These are two really smart men. It's a case built on fact, strong enough to play a hard-nosed journalist and a professional attorney. You curious? It's a call to action. Take a look at the book Evidence That Demands a Verdict by McDowell or Strobel's The Case for Christ. Check it out. Work with someone who knows about this. Don't just nod and move on. Dig in. Ask questions. Test it yourself. The evidence won't run away. Skeptics welcomes. McDowell and Strobel were, and look where it got them. If Jesus rose, he's more than a teacher. He's the Son of God. That's a truth worth wrestling with. What would it mean for you if it's real? That's a question McDowell and Strobel couldn't shake, and neither should we. This evidence built a strong case for Christianity. I encourage you to investigate it for yourself and see where it leads. Please leave any comments or questions or thoughts, ideas you have on this on any of the platforms, or you can email me at plipi777@gmail.com. What do you think about the evidence? If you like this, please share it, subscribe, and have other people check it out. I pray that you will feel God's love and experience God in a deeper way this Easter season. Thank you. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless America.